So we are going to get started. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you. Not loud enough? Yes, we're found. I'm okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to today's event, this evening event. Welcome to Tales from the Classroom. This is the BEF's annual Margaret Metzger Fellowship culminating event. I'd like to welcome the members of the Margaret's family. I'm not sure if any of them are here today, but yes, wonderful, thank you. Welcome. It's wonderful that you make time and effort and out for this event. Thank you for being here. Also, any colleagues of Margaret that are here celebrating her memory today. Also, I'd like to welcome the educators, Brookline families, and BEF leaders who are here. A special thanks to John Andrews, who we'll hear from in a moment, and his partnership and leadership of this program. To Gavin Andrews, no relation to John, who is our chair of the Metzger Committee. To Amy Deutsch, a committee's recent past chair and a passionate advocate for the work of BEF, and the members of the Metzger Committee for their thoughtful work in selecting this year's fellows and helping to organize tonight's event. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Metzger Fellowship. The Metzger Fellowship was created in partnership with Margaret's family and the BEF nearly a decade ago. The fellowship was started in 2015 to honor the legacy of an educator and, importantly, as a teacher mentor. Margaret's commitment to education and teacher mentoring is something that is also very dear to myself. My name is Kim Barnum, and I am the new executive director for the Brookline Education Foundation. Thank you. I see many of my Brookline friends here. I taught in the Brookline Public Schools for over 30 years and am very much passionate about teacher training, advocacy for educators, renewal. I myself have been renewed many times, so this event, and I know many of the people here on this stage and their journey as educators in the public school. So this event is a culmination of my own experience, their experience, and the collective experiences of all of you. So please, a couple of public announcements that if you would like to hear more or learn more about the Brookline Education Foundation, there is a QR code on the back of our program for you can just click on that. It will take you to our website, and we welcome you and thank you for your partnership and your commitment to the Brookline Education Foundation. And now I'd like to introduce John Andrews.
Thank you very much. And once again, I need to say thank you to the BEF for sponsoring this work. This has been some of the most meaningful professional development in my career, the opportunity I've had through the BEF to work with teachers and educators like this group. It's really fascinating and exciting. 30 years ago, I was a student in Margaret Metzger's class, methods class, and I learned a lot from her. I got to work with her as a colleague in 2001 when I came to Brookline Schools. And I'll be sharing some things about her thinking about writing and education as sort of an introduction to each of these great speakers who are going to share their stories in just a minute. You should know that the fellowship tries to get 6 educators every year from the range of Brookline schools. We try to get to all the K-8 schools or the high school every couple of years or so. So we're really trying to have a range of experiences, adults who are working with students in lots of different capacities. And I think you're going to hear that in the stories that we share. The other thing that I learned from Margaret is the importance of community. And that it's in writing in community that we do our best writing, that the person who writes solo has one experience, but when you write with others, as this group has, as they brainstorm together, draft together, reflect together, through the act of community building, they have a better understanding, and they can go deeper sometimes. I think our first speaker is going to talk a little bit about community as well. We're going to hear from Daniel Lipton from the Ridley School, who teaches grade 2. Daniel.
Teaching in uncertain times, the power of music and student voice during times of tragedy. All things shall perish from under the sky. Music alone shall live. Music alone shall live. Music alone shall live, never to die. You don't normally think of a second grade elementary school teacher as being a historian, and you might not think of music and processing current events as being interconnected. But as a teacher for the past 23 years, I find that significant world events are given a new perspective when you are working with 7- and 8-year-olds day in and day out. In second grade, there is a balancing act between being real and truthful about the world around us and shielding the innocence of a 7- or 8-year-old. We have to honor various parent perspectives on what kids should know and be exposed to with the realities of what is going on in the world. You want to be careful not to share too much, but also to be honest and not paint the world as a perfect place either. No matter how hard you try, ultimately, serious current events seep into the classroom community. And through these interactions, I've learned more about myself, my students, and the world around us. I started my student teaching in Cynthia Yee's first grade classroom at what was then Devotion School, now the Florida Ruffin Ridley School, in September 2001. Only a few days into this experience came the tragic events of September 11th. How do you help a first grader to cope with the tragic events like 9/11? My mentor teacher had the students make cards for the heroes, the police officers and firefighters and other first responders who were helping in New York City. There's a quote from Mr. Rogers. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." Giving students a realistic action they can take in the face of such adversity that none of us had control over was inspirational. My mentor teacher also gave students time to process, to draw, write, and play freely. Some students needed to build towers in the block area that they were then knocked down by imaginary airplanes. Students wrestled with the horrors of 9/11 through creative play. That lesson stuck with me throughout my career. Fast forward to October 2023. It was at the beginning of my 22nd year as a second grade teacher in the same school where I had student taught. It was the first day back at school after the attacks of October 7th. Having 7 Israeli students in my class, I felt a particular connection to the atrocities of October 7th. There are times when you can't protect students from the harsh realities of the world. This was one of those times. At morning meeting, we went around the classroom, and each student was given a chance to share what they were thinking or feeling. Many students had strong connections, family or friends directly affected by October 7th, students who knew people whose friends or family were captured by Hamas. Some students had heard a lot on the news, while others had not. But we were all coming together as compassionate citizens of the world to process, understand, and communicate our feelings and thoughts as a community. In my communication to families prior to the discussion, I noted, we are probably all aware of the horrific violence that plagued Israel this weekend. With the terrifying acts by Hamas in Israel, 1/3 of our class is directly impacted by international war. I wanted to acknowledge the pain that many of us are feeling, and I wanted to give families a heads up that tomorrow we will discuss in general terms the current events that are happening. I will give space for kids to share and ask questions. I will try to keep things general and developmentally appropriate and turn the focus to the people who are working to save lives and help those who are hurt. We will read The Peace Book by Todd Parr, sing some peace songs in Hebrew and English, and write and draw about what peace means to us. It feels important to address the situation in some way, as it affects so many students and families and is bound to come up for some of the students. But I wanted to give families a heads up in case your child doesn't know and you would like to prepare them ahead of time. Throughout the next few weeks, we would check in at morning meeting about the events of October 7th. Some days, kids had very little to say. Other days, there was a lot. I also checked in individually with families from Israel in my class. Deborah has been sharing a lot of information with the class about the war. I told one family, who, surprised by this, said, "Wow, she must be hearing more on the news than I thought." I wanted my students to feel heard and know that I cared. I started to think about the day after September 11th, when the students made cards for the police and firefighters. What could we do as a classroom community? I had many ideas that flowed through my brain. I firmly believed that students needed to feel some control over this situation. I had students write letters to President Biden. I framed the letter writing activity as very general. Students could write anything they wanted about any topic, but I emphasized that this could be a chance to talk about the war in Israel. I felt it could be a cathartic way for students to start to heal from these terrible events that affected so many of them personally. Writing, talking, and singing helped get us through this difficult time. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my heart. Shalom chaverim, shalom chaverim, shalom, shalom. Hello, all my friends. Hello, all my friends. Shalom, shalom. One thinks of school as a place of peace, a safe haven from the world around us. And yet we know that sadly schools can be a place of danger. The Sandy Hook shooting hit me pretty hard. As a second grade teacher with my own 2 young children at home, it made my heart heavy. What could I do? Throughout my career, I have used music to enhance learning and make it more meaningful. So I wrote a song. I didn't explicitly tell my class that the song was about the school shooting. In fact, I tied it to our lessons about Dr. King and civil rights. Truly, I was the only one who knew the true meaning of the song, but still, I felt it would be therapeutic both for me and for my students. I'll share an excerpt of the song now. The song is based on a famous quote of MLK. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Music has helped me and my students through many tough times. Yet even the power of music can be stifled in times of trouble. In 2020, with COVID-19 and asynchronous learning, our voices were literally masked. Singing was not allowed due to fear of spreading coronavirus. There were a few creative ways around this. Kids could listen to educational songs on the smartboard, and we could have talent and music shares from home on Zoom. But in May 2021, when singing was again allowed at school, that was a joy like no other. I could teach my students songs and dances. It opened up our classroom community in a new way. Some of my students could show their talents in a way I hadn't been able to experience before. I was sad for all the time that was lost, but grateful that the joys of music could once again flow through my classroom. Teaching is a work of art and a work of heart. In these dark moments of history, the role of a teacher feels extra important as we guide our students through the unknown. I wish these horrible events never happened, but I am grateful to have been with my students and their families through these vulnerable moments in our educational journey together. And I am grateful that I have the ability to use music as a way to heal my students and myself during times of trouble. As educators, we have a chance to shape our students' stories and support them through those heavy experiences through love, compassion, and yes, music. As part of a poetry unit musical that I do with my students, we end with a song written by a mentor of mine, Sean Hartley. I'd like to end with the chorus of this song. I hope that the lessons from these historically significant events and the memories I've created with my students will live on in powerful and meaningful ways, helping them to grow as individuals and citizens of our world during both good and difficult times that they face. And that maybe my students will look back on their second grade experience and hum a tune. I will live forever in the songs that I have sung, in the dances I have danced, in the bells that I have rung, in the joy that I have given, and even when I'm gone, my song will live on. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel's piece reminds me of the importance of listening to voices. One of Margaret's strong beliefs was that in our discussions of schools and school policies, it was important for teachers' voices to be in the conversation. And part of her work as an educator and a writer was to get her stories published and out into the world where many people have continued to read them in teacher education programs. The next piece we're going to hear from Lily Glickstein, who teaches at Driscoll, grade 4, is also about listening to voices and the importance of teachers listening to student voices. Lily.
You never want the kids to think you don't like them. Ellen's comment landed like a gut punch. This was the advice from my principal upon letting me go after my first disastrous year of teaching at Thompson School. I knew she could only be talking about Jada. I still view Jada as my hardest student, often with the don't jinx it caveat, and I hope she'll always be my hardest student. Oh, Jada. Jada was a tough third grader. She bullied other kids, pushing up against them with her own body and calling them mean names. She tantrumed at unpredictable times, taking literally all of my attention to calm her down. She hoarded classroom items and shrieked when other kids tried to use them. She threw the contents of her desk around the room, aiming for her classmates. By Thanksgiving break, I had completely lost any semblance of control over my class. Soon, Jada directed all of her more difficult behaviors at me. At the risk of sounding like I'm whining about being bullied by a 9-year-old, it did feel particularly vindictive. On Valentine's Day, she screamed in my face that she hated me and I was the worst teacher in the world when I reminded her we were a no-candy school. When I learned my grandfather died and needed a moment to compose myself, she thundered that it was my fault we were late for library. These were things I had done to her, and she let me know as much with withering stares and bellowing screams. It all came to a head one day in the spring when, after saying her name sternly one too many times, she physically pushed me out of the classroom and locked the door. So it's not that I didn't like Jada. I felt deeply for her. I wanted the best for her. But Jada and I had a troubled relationship, to say the least. I thought I needed an iron grip on the classroom to prove my worth as a first-year teacher. But with Jada's behaviors derailing every lesson, my grip was far from iron. She, on the other hand, thought I hated her. Cue Ellen, you never want the kids to think you don't like them. I was too overwhelmed with the all-consuming anxiety and gripping panic of teaching a child in crisis to tap into my reserves of compassion when I heard that little adage. Now, almost a decade later, I'm far enough away from it, and even though I did not take very kindly to the original feedback, here's some more unsolicited advice for you past me, so listen up. Here's what you should not have done. You should not have moved Jada's desk away from the other table groups, an island in a sea of third-grade nations working together happily. It only made her feel more like a pariah. You should not have sighed deeply when her little face started to crumple up, because even though you knew what was coming, the sigh really wasn't necessary. You should not have been afraid to share the realities of her classroom behavior with her mother until it was too late. Here's what you should have done. You should have written emails home early on that connoted more of a partnership rather than, your kid did this insane thing, could you talk to her about it at home? You should have acted quicker and evacuated the room before Mr. R, the ineffectual guidance counselor, restrained her using all of his body weight in front of the other stunned students. You should have started the year with more intentional getting to know you games and community builders. You should have been crystal clear on your expectations, setting the foundation for a smoothly run classroom. In fact, you should have flouted the rules of that particular school and not taught any curriculum until late September, instead focusing on routines and procedures. Then maybe the mayhem would have held off until after Christmas break. You should have tried harder, way harder, to foster a relationship with Jada. As painful as it was to hear, Ellen was absolutely right. Kids do perceive, and often correctly, when someone doesn't like them. You should have sought Jada out during snack time, chit-chatting and filing away facts she shared to ask about later. You should have noticed that she was trying to reach out for connection when she pushed kids away so she could sit in her spot at the rug, which coincidentally was right next to your rocking chair. You should have found things to openly and publicly praise her on. Wow, Jada, this writing! You have the most amazing descriptive sentences here. She really was bright. You should have called on her more frequently and given her lots of genuine, yes, definitely. Most of all, you should have asked her some goddamn help when her behavior became too much for you to handle on her own. And to be fair, the administration probably should have given you more help too. Right after that year, I would stew on all that had happened, beaming thoughts and advice to Jada in a rather unrealistic daydream. Jada, here's what you should not have done. You should not have stepped on Nora's foot. Nora was small and fragile and pretty, and you were big and furious at everyone, so I kind of see why you picked her as your first target. You should not have thrown desks. Your reputation couldn't handle it. Kids already thought you were mean just by looking at you, and throwing desks cemented this in their minds. You really should not have pushed your teacher out of the classroom, mostly because I walked back in through the neighboring classroom's shared door 20 seconds later, so that didn't even work. Jada, here's what you should have done. You should have used one of the strategies that Mr. R talked with you about. I can only assume. Let's hope that he didn't just play Uno with you after you destroyed the classroom. You could have stopped the spiral and the explosive anger at the start. You should have asked to take a break and remove yourself when you felt jealous looking at Nora getting some positive attention from Ivy and Molly. Most of all, you should have asked for some goddamn help when your behavior became too much for you to handle on your own. And to be fair, the administration probably should have given you more help too. But here's the thing, Jada. You really couldn't have done anything differently all those years ago. Looking back, I suspect you had undiagnosed PTSD from witnessing a traumatic event as a young child. Furthermore, you lived in a society that already sees tall for their age Black girls as a threat, and you had no positive peer connections to keep you tethered to our classroom community. The aforementioned ineffectual guidance counselor gave you almost no tools of your own to self-regulate when your emotions overwhelmed you and you felt your safety become compromised. All of these things made up the perfect storm of a kid in crisis with no way of getting out. Asking for help in this state? I don't know that that was possible for a 9-year-old. You needed so much more than our school could give you. There is no way I could have said these things to you, Jada, but I wish I could let you know that I understand and I care about your success. Would you even believe me if I said it? Years later, I had a possible redo. Ian was not exactly like Jada, but our relationship was pretty similar. I had to fight myself not to roll my eyes and huff at him. He made it his mission to make me roll my eyes and huff at him. Ian called out constantly, and I mean constantly, such that I could not get through a single lesson without hearing a months-old tick-tock sound every couple of seconds, going off like a car alarm. He even got most of the other boys to join him in what can only be described as heckling for the better part of the school day. Whereas Jada was a live wire, Ian's acting out was more akin to death by 1,000 paper cuts. I taught Ian 5 years after I taught Jada. I was infinitely better at classroom management, but your average upper elementary student was no better at regulating themselves, arguably worse because of the social development losses from the pandemic. Well, I utilized all of those classroom management tips that I just gave past me a page or two ago, and you know what? The mayhem did hold off until after Christmas break. The difference between Ian and Jada's school experience was massive. Ian had an effective guidance counselor in my colleague Hannah Goldberg. She met with him weekly, where they worked on his self-esteem and practiced calming down strategies. My newfound classroom management improvements did make things run a lot smoother, which gave kids less opportunity to get into trouble. I had a more successful parent-teacher relationship with Ian's parents than with Jada's, which meant we acted as more of a partnership when things got tricky. Ian also had a few social connections in class, which were his lifeline to feeling accepted at school. Without them, he too would have been pushed off onto an island, a pariah, proving his reputation correct with every snarl. One day, Ian refused to leave for a counseling session during choice time, which, by the way, is something that current me would gently tell past me not to do, find another time for him to leave, or make what the other kids do in his absence a little less fun. Upon seeing Miss Goldberg at the door, Ian initiated the first stages of throwing a fit. Balling up his little fists, tears welling up in his eyes, kicking the trash can on the way to the door. Seeing these signs triggered something in me. I marched outside the classroom with him and said sharply, "Look, Ian, everyone is working on something. What you are working on right now is regulating yourself when you get frustrated. I happen to believe, no, I know that you can improve. If I didn't think you could get any better at this, I wouldn't insist you go with Miss Goldberg. But you can improve, so go." I was firm and frustrated, maybe too firm and frustrated. But the next thing I knew, Ian silently got up and followed Miss Goldberg to the guidance office. Success. On the last day of school, to both of our surprise, Ian sidled up next to me and mumbled, "Thank you for being my teacher." He averted my gaze and wrapped me in a 4'5" hug that melted my heart. Past me would have been amazed that the frustrations of the school year could lead to this. Ian, meanwhile, must have known that I understood and cared about his success.
One of the things I get to do before this event every year is go through a folder I have called Margaret Metzger Essays. And I read a bunch of things that she's written, and I think about what she said about teaching. And I also get to stumble through some letters of recommendation people wrote about her when she won an award from the BEF, the Caverly Award in 2005. And there's a letter from a former student of hers who talks about her slightly incisive comments on student papers, which could be a little rough, but also would say things like, "Tell the truth." And I think what we really worked on this summer was to tell the truth, to figure out how can we tell our truth and hear the kids as they tell their truths. Our next speaker, I think, does a great job of that. Matt Picard is going to talk to us. He's from Hayes, where he teaches grade 5.
Ari Leibowitz was a tough kid. In the middle of a lesson, he would shout, "Ron Paul wants us all to get bombed," or pointing at the potted plant, "The government is listening." It was disruptive, yet I will admit that I later poked through the fern with a pencil. Everyone who teaches can, on the spot, rattle off the names of their most memorable students. They have them ready to go, tattooed on their minds, can recall them quicker than perhaps the names of their own family members. Teachers, go ahead and do this right now. Give me 5. You done? I'm willing to bet that the majority of these students were tough kids. When I say a tough kid, I mean someone who makes you earn your money. Someone who staves off the ultimate replacement of flesh and blood teachers with AI drones on little plastic wheels. If every year we had a room full of the easy kids, the ones who were a sentient fungus to zombify the adults, would start a book group with some yellowed copies of Tuck Everlasting and create an equitable rotation of guards to beat us back with meter sticks. With a room full of these kids, we'd have little to do, and our days and evenings would be too enjoyable, our sleep patterns too regular, and our personal relationships too healthy. It's the tough ones we really have to thank. Not only do they keep us in business, but tough kids force us to be our best selves, to strategize, to be on the same page with colleagues, oftentimes the same walkie-talkie frequency. We have to reach deep into our toolboxes and pull out all the tricks. We have to hide our toolboxes to keep the sharp things out of reach. These tough kids are the gift nobody wants, the cheese-scented candle, or the South Beach Diet Cookbook, 2nd edition. But unlike these, there's some value to the gift in the lessons we learn and the relationships we build. In my years as a teacher, I've come across a fair share of tough kids. Take, for example, the unengaged tough kid. This is a kid who is difficult to motivate, working really hard at finding every way not to work. Bathroom breaks, dull pencils, trips to the nurse, and more dull pencils. They make you feel like you're bad at your job because, as a teacher, you are at least part entertainer. And with this kid, you're bombing. You can't even keep the audience in their seats. Then you have the socially distracted kid, the one who, like a salmon swimming upstream, is biologically compelled to do only one thing: talk to other kids during your lesson. VIP seating, incentives and rewards, nothing can deter this instinctual drive or their brazen will to ask for repetition of directions just given. Also, the pot stirrer, who, when all is tranquil in the precarious lives of their classmates, lights the world on fire just to watch it burn. They randomly accuse others of farting and whisper things like, "I think you should really know what she said about you." There's the technocrat who is always oddly closing browser windows every time you walk past, and who you're pretty sure has sold your credit card number on the dark web. The runner who keeps you and the rest of the team in shape, and the anonymous tough kid who is humble yet also responsible for that big drawing of a penis under the table that everyone saw when you lifted it during science. Ari Leibowitz, however, was a unique type of tough kid. The first sign was his response to an assignment in which students were to record a video of an original poem accompanied by images. The whole thing was supposed to be 2 to 3 minutes. Ari wrote his while secreted away in a cave fashioned out of cardboard privacy dividers. It was titled "Weapons, Weapons, and More Weapons of Zelda," was 40 minutes long, and featured no images other than his mop of brown tousled hair and his thick glasses, face far too close to the camera, like an elderly parent on Zoom. Ari's poem was part diatribe and part medieval ballad. It featured minstrel style singing, humble a ho, was peppered with provocative rhetorical questions such as, "Are we civilized people or are we babies?" and ended with him firing wantonly about with a 2-finger laser gun. I gave him criticism, sandwiched between 2 slices of positivity, that it needed to be cut down. Ari kept the bread and tossed out the meat of my feedback. The runtime remained the same. He was a tough kid, but certainly not the unengaged type. In fact, he was quite engaged and frankly uninhibited with his sharing, a blurter. Perhaps this is another type of tough kid to add to the list. "Sarah Palin can see all the way to Russia." Ari, we don't call out. "Bernie Sanders hides prescription meds in his woodshed." To curtail blurting, Ari was under a chip system. At the beginning of each subject, I gave him 5 circular plastic chips. Each time he wanted to participate, he had to cough one up. This is, if I could get one. This system's fatal flaw was that Ari figured out immediately that if he simply death-gripped his ration of chips with pit bull-like clamping force, he never ran out. It would have taken a screwdriver to pry open his fingers, and honestly, I was interested in what other politicians I should be wary of. He also stirred the pot, mostly my pot. During one morning meeting, students were to give a silent greeting. Most waved, unsure what else to do, but when it got to Ari, he proceeded with aplomb. He raised his sweatshirt to his mouth and muffled a scream into it. He then repeatedly thrust 3 fingers in the air, meaning read between the lines, swallowed a bolus of air, and belched loudly. "Ari, I'm not sure what part of that was your greet," he stiff-handed me. "I'll show you." He then repeated the sequence, complete with the belch. I bit the inside of my mouth to stifle a laugh and sent him to the take a break spot, where he proceeded to loudly clack the chair against the wall in a staccato rhythm that accompanied the remainder of the group conversation. It's a fast-learned lesson that break spots should not contain rocking chairs. For the rest of the year, I tried to curtail, but also eagerly anticipated Ari's outbursts. As with most kids, we eventually came to an understanding, and he matured, so they were less frequent by spring. Too bad. Years later, I was sitting at my desk, and in walked Ari. He was tall now. He smiled and greeted me in a totally normal way. His handshake was firm. He told me he was in school planning to study medicine. I recounted the good old days of 6th grade, reminding him of his various antics, the ballad, the belching, the conspiracies. To me, we were reminiscing like 2 old war buddies in a coffee shop. However, when I finished, Ari just scratched his head with a sheepish grin. He remembered none of it. Clearly, the whole thing had mattered a lot more to me than it did to him. Turns out he was just living his 6th grade life, while I was trying super hard to succeed at a thing. Ari taught me a lesson that I repeatedly forget and have to remember every year as I try to gain ground with a tough kid. That good classroom management is a calculated mix of caring a lot, but not too much. Athletes will tell you this. If you step up to the race gripped with pressure, you'll burn out before the finish. Their best performances are when they are prepared with fitness and experience, but manage to maintain a cool detachment coupled with a willingness to find some joy in the suck. This is often easier said than done, and it's a cruel fact that every year I will be gifted with at least one tough kid in my race. Many years, this looks like me cramping up and having to start all over again in November. And the worst ones, I'm puking Gatorade on the side of the road and counting the days until school ends. However, the good years are the ones in which I manage to find a point where I hit a rhythm and breathe. I check my pace, hold back my first reaction, even laugh, because things go a lot better when I do. We do a tremendous service to our kids and ourselves when we lend them all some level of appreciation, and we take ourselves a little less seriously, especially with the tough kids. Everyone's happier, everyone learns more, and life as a classroom teacher feels not only like a reasonable proposition, but a worthy pursuit. It's just the not-so-simple matter of accepting the gift that nobody wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Margaret and I were talking once about what's a meaningful life and what a small conversation over lunch. What's a meaningful life? And we got into it about trying to go off and do everything and everywhere, or what she was suggesting to me, maybe just standing still and letting it all happen around you. And I'm thinking about that here tonight as I'm thinking about all the circles that are happening right here, all the circles that have intersected just by staying in this one place. That I'm celebrating this teacher I worked with 30 years ago as a grad student, that Kim is seeing someone who she saw get hired to be celebrated tonight, telling a story about teaching a difficult kid who comes back and tells a story that may be a different story than you remember. And then I think of Matt, who's going to present next, who told me just a few minutes ago that this is a room he had his orientation in when he started here in the Brookline school system. So I'd like to bring up Matt DeGrace, a special education teacher at Brookline High School for the English and Social Studies Department. Matt.
Abby said fudge. Now, that replacement word might not seem important, but if you've ever met her, you know the word fuck is always at the tip of her tongue. For her, that four-letter word is kind of like a placeholder, similar to how other people might say or like to gather their thoughts. But this time she paused for a millisecond, saw my face with the raised eyebrow as I braced myself for the expletive again, and instead Abby said fudge. It was February. We had been at this for 5 months, and the cacophony of swears had been nonstop from Abby as they echoed around my 11th grade, American Studies class. We had tried a marathon of strategies to stem the flood of profane language. Stern didn't work. Contacting home didn't work. Repercussions didn't work. Administrators trying to intervene didn't work. We had many, 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 many rough days in which we never knew what she was going to say, but today she said fudge. A small victory that equaled that of the Battle of Gettysburg. We had hit a turning point. As with most classes, every year I start by reviewing class policies. The late homework policy, the tardy policy, the phone policy, leaving the room policy, and lastly, the disrespectful behavior policy, which is a bit of a catch-all for anything I missed. On the very first day of school, it became clear that Abby was a student who's going to challenge every one of those policies. I noticed on day one, Abby had her phone out, swiping aimlessly through content. I bent down next to her desk, quietly saying, "Abby, can you put the phone away?" "No," was all she said. The simplicity of her response set me back. This student had absolutely no difficulty pushing back against adults. Nor did she put much weight to my classroom policies that were neatly formatted and printed on the 8.5 by 11.5 piece of paper that was in front of her. I can already tell the bottle of Excedrin I bought for the school year was not going to be enough. Over the next few months, Abby pushed back with more challenging behaviors, including Abby coming to class 10 minutes late, singing and dancing her way to her seat. She clearly knows how to make an entrance, but now the class is distracted enough to ask. Abby popping out of class, only to return with a burrito bowl from Chipotle and loudly complaining that Uber Eats had forgotten her chips. Abby coming late to class, swearing as she loudly divulged to the whole class with a heavy sprinkling of swears that she just got her finger shut in the elevator door and it hurts. Abby texting. Oh, that phone. And it was an everyday battle for which I only remember achieving Pyrrhic victories if best. My co-teachers and I tried every response and support imaginable, trying to figure out how to get Abby to follow the classroom policies, be less disruptive, and most importantly, engage and learn. There were so many meetings, and many felt fruitless, like we were working our way through the flowchart of interventions with little hope that any of it would work. But in December, one of those meetings, facilitated by Abby's social worker, bore fruit. I wish I could recall with detail how that meeting went. But the truth is, I skipped that meeting, leaving my co-teacher to go instead. I had hit a point with Abby where I thought it was pointless to keep trying. Every time she was late to class, I hoped beyond hope that she was not just late, but out for the day, pray the week. It didn't help that I taught her in both history and English class, often having her in back-to-back 55-minute blocks multiple times a week. I had a counter in my head tracking the dwindling number of classes we would have together. When my co-teacher returned from the meeting and I asked her how it went, she described an interesting scene where in an office surrounded by her dean, guidance counselor, social worker, and her teacher, Abby spent the meeting minutely and meticulously completing her makeup while simultaneously running the conversation. It was like she was holding court, my co-teacher said. Besides that, the meeting was fine. But two things she mentioned that might help her in class was if she could pick her seat and who she sat with. Given how I was feeling at that point in the year with her, I was willing to try anything to try and make the rest of the year more palatable or even survivable. So at the beginning of the next class, I pulled Abby into an empty classroom next to ours. At first, she clearly thought she was in trouble and bristled in the empty classroom, readying herself to argue with me, who she clearly saw as an adversary, until I asked her simply where and who she wanted to sit with. She paused and said harmoniously, "Oh, okay." Now at ease, she surprisingly didn't ask to sit with her best friend in the class, but instead with other classmates I had never seen her interact with before. When I asked her why them, she started into an impressively self-aware and thoughtful explanation saying, "Erica is sweet but not distracting, so I feel like we'd be good together. David and I were in the same history class in 9th grade, plus we went to elementary school together, so we've worked together, but he's pretty focused, so I think that would help. Maria is new this year, but has built a good friendship with Erica that I would feel bad breaking up." Her self-awareness was astonishing, and her thought process so far deeper than I ever considered when developing new table groups. The insight continued when I followed up with the question of where did she want to sit? I like the corner, but not facing the center of the class as I get distracted. If I have the chair that kind of faces the wall, I won't see what other students are doing and will be more productive. Also, when I'm late, I don't have to cross the classroom. I can just pop over to my seat. The shift in her demeanor in that empty classroom was remarkable. That conversation had started with Abby anticipating a fight, but it evolved into the two of us brainstorming and conversing about how best to support her in our class. I quickly wrote down what she said on a yellow sticky note, placed it in my pocket, told her I'd make the changes for the next class. The next day, Abby sat with her new group, working together on an assignment, and only took one prompt for her to put her phone away. She asked questions, she wrote down information, and of course she swore. This was still December after all, and there were still going to be plenty of hard days ahead. If I was a better writer, I might come up with a beautiful metaphor to wrap up the subtle changes that occurred for both of us over those weeks. But the only thing that comes to mind is an artichoke, because it has layers and a heart in the middle. Abby still came late, but began entering the room more quietly. She would at times say loudly, "What the hell are we doing?" which could be seen as disruptive, but I began to choose to see it as her asking for clarification. Her request to use an empty classroom next door to work by herself would previously have raised alarm bells about her trying to avoid teacher oversight, but was now seen as a student who knew she got easily distracted and benefited from a quiet space. Eventually, she even stayed after school for extra help working one-on-one with me. I remember turning a blind eye to the torrent of cusses she spewed while we reviewed the events of the Trail of Tears and the genocide of Native Americans. She eventually got quiet, turned to me and said, "This is fucked up." To which I quietly agreed, saying, yeah, it is. There was the emergence of trust, which only ever works when it goes both ways. I trusted Abby that she knew what she needed to succeed and needed the space necessary to do so. She began to trust that when I did push back against some behaviors, there was probably a pretty good reason. She was not only a student in my class, but had become a partner in her own education, something that my previous approach had not been able to provide space for. We started the year with my classroom policies that tended to ignore that with students and teachers together, it is our classroom, which only works if we listen to students, work with students, and partner with them. So when February came around, and Abby clearly felt frustrated in class and took the moment to air her grievances to the world, that millisecond shift in her brain to utter fudge rather than that other word was a moment to say the least. Towards the end of May, there was some downtime in class as students started paying less attention to the assigned short story they were supposed to read and more attention to the nice weather that began to emerge outside and the quickly approaching end of the year. While talking to students at Abby's table, she turned to me and asked me bluntly, "Was I a difficult student this year?" I thought for a moment and said, "Well, you weren't easy, but we got to a good place. I tend to call students like you prickly, like a cactus." "What does that mean?" she inquired. "Well, it's kind of a teacher-friendly way of saying you're a pain in the ass." Abby paused, smiled at me, said, "Fair," with a slight shrug before picking up her book and continuing to read while the rest of the class chattered on, distracted. Thank you.
One of the tenets Margaret had about writing is that we learn who we are and what we believe through the act of writing, that it's in the process of writing that we have a better understanding of what we really think. And that's a big part of our workshop, that we write together, that we write multiple drafts, that we write into understanding ourselves and maybe understanding the topic that we're writing about. No one exemplifies that better than Katie McGraw, math specialist.
My story is entitled Exceptionally Curious. "Katie, tell me what your brother is up to. I always wonder what became of him." My brother is 56 years old, and I still get this question when I meet his former teachers on the street. The tentative curiosity mixed with the regret and self-reflection embedded in this question hits me every time. This is one of the things that drives me as a teacher. My brother is decidedly the most intelligent person in our family, and yet 8th grade graduation was his last. In high school, he was failing his homework and papers classes, but doing fine in his test-based ones. He had begun skipping class often. In 1985, when my mother was told that he was no longer welcome at BHS because he was a bad influence on his friends, despite no disciplinary action to his name, she had to push hard to get them to suggest another solution for his education. He was enrolled at Simon's Rock of Bard College, where he could begin college-level classes before completing high school. His intellect and curiosity were undeniable, but his responses to school were unacceptable in the eyes of BHS. The next year, as the senior section editor of what would have been his senior year in Meridian, I defiantly included his photo among the graduates and then let the matter rest. And yet, almost 40 years later, in the midst of my math specialist work in Brookline, All this pops right back up for me as I get to know Robert. I know that already. Want me to show you? Said Robert as he rushed over to me with his little mask on during the first week of kindergarten. Robert has always been a thinker. He began Lawrence School knowing everything, wanting challenges, jumping out of his seat to share his knowledge every 2 seconds. He was also climbing on his desk, running up to other students' desks, breaking their social distance barriers to tell them what he knew, and shouting across the room over the head of his one-to-one aide. But nonetheless, he was a mathematical thinker. He was curious, intuitive, and had many skills already honed. By the time he was in first grade, we couldn't keep him challenged enough. Besides the fact that he always wanted to talk about his obsession with Billie Eilish and what her new song meant, how well she gets along with her brother, and how he knew all the words to all of her songs, he also wanted to delve into mathematical problems, tell me about how he solved them, and show me his correct answers. When he was calm enough, we would give him time to share his insights with the class and work to make them understandable to his first grade peers. Often he went to the learning center during math, missing both the instruction and the sharing, as the decision was made that he wouldn't miss out if he missed math time, given how strong his skills were. As I enter his third grade classroom, math class begins and Robert heads straight for the sign-out sheet to go to the bathroom. Now's not the time, Robert, his teacher says with eyes rolled in my direction. Robert goes back to his desk and pulls out a book to read, head down toward his lap and body turned away from instruction. His way of skipping class, while still under the watchful eye of his one-to-one aide. When prompted to attend to the independent math work in front of him, Robert quickly solves the problem and then draws base 10-block pictures to illustrate each number in the equation, and is finished. When I ask him to show how he actually knew the answer, he says, "I showed it," and retreats into his book. I've known Robert for years, and I know this is not how he solved the problem. But for many months now, these illustrations of each part of the equation have been the only responses he's been putting on paper. I also know that Robert is a master at full-on conflict if he perceives you're asking him to do more than what he feels like at the moment. Sometimes the fight is worth having, and sometimes it isn't. A dysregulated Robert is to be avoided at all cost. On a new day, near the end of class, I ask, "Robert, tell me about how you got this answer," looking at yet more base 10-block pictures. "Did you use these to solve it?" "No, of course not. I thought about 900 minus 250, and that's 650. So then I added 27 because the problem was 927 minus 250, so I got 677. "Wow," I said, "can I share that with the class? That's a cool way of doing it." "Yeah, I can share it." "Great. How do you think you could write that down so that people can see what you thought?" Within seconds, he had written numbers, lines, and equations to show the way he had broken up the numbers and put them back together. This was the Robert I remembered. This is what had been hiding behind those illustrations all these months. Ever since I started teaching in Brookline, not so very long after my brother had been asked to leave this district, I've been determined to do better for students like him. Students who start out eager and bursting with pride, but fade into the background as the years go on. Students who feel encouraged and excited to share their brilliance in school, but soon learn that there's a time and place for that, and rarely do they choose the correct one. Students that don't fit within the normal range of our instruction, or the boundaries of expected responses. Students like Robert. Robert and my brother are sometimes called twice exceptional students, although I prefer to think that all students are exceptional in oh so many ways. Twice exceptional means a student is gifted and also has learning needs. In the 1970s and 80s, my brother was too smart, but our educational practices were not smart enough for the needs part ever to be acknowledged. If he knew everything on tests and could get up and teach the class when teachers wanted to catch him out for not listening, why wouldn't he do what was expected? They likely were content to assume that the fact that he was not passing in homework or papers was due to defiance rather than executive function challenges. Despite his current success in his job and his life as a fully functional adult, I, as an educator in the Brookline schools, grieve for what more we could have done for him. Robert, too, could be called twice exceptional. In our current climate, his needs are well documented and his services are in place. He has an aide with him at all times to support his unexpected responses to school demands. He takes breaks when he's unable to regulate his outbursts. He has space for small group instruction, and the expectations of him are created in response to his IEP. But what of his passions? What of his unique interests and his time to share those? What of his need to be included in the learning community in a meaningful way? I'm curious. When I go to say goodbye to 3B on the last day, I ask if anyone will not be back for 4th grade. I won't be, Miss McGraw, Robert says as he comes over to me and wraps me in a big hug. Oh, Robert, I've so enjoyed being your teacher since kindergarten and hearing all about the things you love. Good luck next year, and please, please keep in touch. My grief at saying goodbye to Robert is not only about missing his amazing thinking or missing the challenge of his unpredictable behaviors. It's also about the questions that come up for me as I say goodbye to yet another student who I may have let down. Over his 4 years, what had become of Robert's enthusiasm, his persistence, his love of math, his passion for telling everyone what he knew? Had the way we provide his much-needed services taken away his chance to share that passion with others? Had our fear of his outbursts kept us from letting him express his thoughts? What had I done, or not done, that had him hiding in his book? What had we done to his love of learning and pride in his own knowledge? Is it possible to get it back? Now I may never know. I went to review his IEP as I was writing this in June, and I was reflecting on what we did well for him and what we may not have, and much sooner than I had gotten him out of my mind, his file had been removed from Brookline's database. Where is it in our teaching that we squash the natural curiosity of young people? How many times have I dismissed a student's passionate tangent so that we could get to the focal point of the lesson? How many times have I called on one student over another because I knew they would give a clear and concise answer rather than a rambling and free associating one? Where is it that we send the message that some pursuits are worthy and others are not? What decisions are we making that prioritize remediation of specific needs over fostering student passions, that prioritize expected behavior over opportunities to pursue one's curiosities? How many times have I heard and even said, if they finish the must-do work, then they can do the challenge or pursue that project? Do schools these days even encourage curiosity? Or is it too inconvenient in the race to enforce expected behaviors, meet standards, and fulfill minutes? Which is really more important to a child's future, cultivating their love of pursuing knowledge, their identity and agency as learners, or cramming the standards into their growing minds? As hard as I've tried in my 30-plus years of teaching to ensure that every child is seen, is respected for who they are, and is provided the support and challenges they deserve, each year I feel that something has been missed. Someone has been done a disservice. Someone has left less excited about school than when they entered. It is those students that don't fit the expectations and capabilities of public schools that climb around my brain the most, that run up to my heart to remind me that they're there, that disrespect my social boundaries and insist on clinging to my thoughts, that I cannot let go of, and who continue to teach me important lessons as the years go on. These students fit nicely into the family baggage I carry. These people are always with me as I run into someone on the street. Layla, so good to see you. Tell me, what has become of your brother, Robert?
Thank you, Katie. So I mentioned circles. We're going to circle back. We started with Daniel in a 2nd grade class, and we're going to end with Alexa Cuff, who's a guidance counselor for grades K through 2 at Baker School.
I walk into the class feeling like a celebrity, Mary Poppins, a Disney princess. There's a pretend microphone set up for me and everything. A kindergarten class asked to interview me for the helpers in the community section of their social studies unit. They identified me as a helper in the school and came up with interview questions to ask the school counselor. The kids take turns asking me questions about my job. They ask me about how I became a school counselor, how I helped the school, my favorite color, my favorite season, you name it. They are adorable. I am adorable. The whole moment is adorable. Then one quiet little girl raises her hand to ask me the question that I can't stop thinking about. Since you help people with their big feelings, how do you take care of your feelings? It feels like someone just pulled the curtain on The Wizard of Oz. I stumble upon a hasty response and move on. But she had struck a chord. I've dedicated my career to taking care of kids and families, and yet how do I take care of myself? This girl's innocent question is one I'm still trying to answer. My first year as a school counselor was a noteworthy one. In addition to being a new counselor, I was also facing the recent loss of my oldest brother and just trying to get through the days. Imposter syndrome is a real obstacle for many people, and it was especially difficult for this mental health professional who was simultaneously struggling with her own mental health. How can I help others cope with the challenges of life when I too am just barely scraping by? I've struggled with depression for most of my life, and yet I'm the person people turn to when social and emotional concerns arise. Can I be an effective counselor if I'm also a swirly, stormy mess inside? The shame of all my shortcomings came flooding back to me when that sweet 5-year-old asked me how I take care of myself. Some students are capable of holding a mirror up to us, choreographing a symbiotic dance of reflection and connection. One of my students, Eloise, did just that. She was in 2nd grade and had very big feelings. She screamed every morning when she was dropped off at school. She bawled, she howled, she sobbed. She hurled her body onto her father, pleading for him not to leave. I learned that one of her family members was facing mental health and substance use issues. Her world was quickly turning upside down. She was grieving a loved one who was still alive. It was my job to help her get through the school day. How could she learn when she was facing the unimaginable? So we spent a lot of time together that year, just trying to get through the days, learning coping strategies, talking about the tough stuff, the good stuff, and all the stuff in between. At 7 years old, she faced the gut-wrenching reality of a family torn apart by addiction. I too know what this pain feels like. Although our stories are different, they are intertwined. 2 days after the 2-year anniversary of my oldest brother's death, her family member also lost their life. This was a hard year for both of us. It was an honor to sit with her during this moment in her life, and I'm grateful she sat with me too. Elementary school classrooms often use the American Sign Language symbol for Me Too. This Me Too is a quiet yet profound sign of connection. It is a way to silently gesture that I too can relate to you without taking away from the person who is speaking. I was drawn into counseling because I too know what pain and sorrow feel like, and I have a desire to help others through the hard parts of life. I also know what healing feels like, and I hope to share that with young people. I can gesture, Me Too, to all the students, families, and teachers I've worked with. I acknowledge the agony and joy that come with living a life. This capacity to feel is what makes me a good counselor, and it is what makes some days really hard. It is the magic of being human. Magic crossed my path when I met Cynthia, a 6th grade student struggling with depression and self-harm. She was also sentimental and hilarious. She presented as a happy-go-lucky goofball who hid her depression well. I could relate. We connected over a mutual love of dance and music, particularly Ariana Grande's latest album. On any given day, one might have heard us jamming to the song No Tears Left to Cry, a shared favorite of ours as they walked by the counseling office. Every time that song comes on shuffle, I still turn it up to full volume, think of Cynthia, and let the music work its magic on me. One particularly hard day, Cynthia couldn't put into words how terrible she felt. The sadness overcame her, and she melted into a puddle in front of me. Since words weren't working, I suggested she try putting the feelings on paper. She drew a big, juicy blue teardrop on the page as her tears poured over the paper. I held on to that paper and throughout the year, she added to her teardrop drawing when words couldn't do her feelings justice. As the year progressed, she transformed the teardrop into a beautiful but melancholy blue bird. We were both leaving the school at the end of the year, so we begrudgingly said our goodbyes when the year came to an end. She gifted me her artwork on the last day of school and told me that I taught her that sometimes we can turn our tears into something beautiful. I framed the picture to hang in my office, sneaking glances for inspiration on tough days. As educators, we put on a show every day. It doesn't really matter if you're having a bad day or week or year. This show isn't about you. It's about the students. We are required to leave certain pieces of ourselves behind when we walk through the school doors. Like a soldier preparing for battle, I must be sharp, clear-headed, and focused. I need to be prepared for the day ahead and all the unknowns that might unfold. Yet, my humanness seeps into my work every day. Some days, grief hits me like a tidal wave, pulling me under with no air to breathe. Some days, depression and anxiety take control of my body, making me feel frozen. I used to feel shame on those days, and sometimes I still do, but just like the students I work with, I too must remember that I can do hard things. All my feelings are okay. So, how do I answer my kindergartner's clever question? I have a sneaking suspicion that my answer will change and evolve with me over time. For me, self-care occasionally looks like a cliche face mask and a sweet treat. However, most of the time, caring for myself is messy and uncomfortable. It might include being brutally honest with myself, stepping outside of my comfort zone, like I'm doing right now, setting up boundaries and sticking to them, or finally setting up that appointment I've been avoiding. Other times it means taking a mental health day or asking for help. I'm still a work in progress, but I know that if I do not nurture and honor myself and my needs, I will not be able to fully show up for others. However, our schools typically do not create time for rest, room for play, or space for sorrow. Broken systems rely on the self-sacrificial nature of big-hearted people. What some have not realized is that broken systems will break people, leading to good educators burning out or leaving the profession altogether. I dream of a world where our systems align with wellness, where taking care of your physical and mental health is part of the agreed-upon recipe for becoming an excellent educator. Supporting the well-being of educators is crucial to supporting the well-being of students. I fully acknowledge that this work cannot be done solely on the individual level, but as a counselor, I often return back to what is in my control, reflecting on what and who I have agency over, myself. So today, I urge you to ask yourself the question, how do you take care of yourself? You might be surprised by where your answer leads you. If you don't know where to start, ask for help. I know firsthand how crucial caring for yourself is in order to create a more peaceful and loving world. Taking ownership of your own mental health is revolutionary and transformative. It is contagious. It can feel like turning your tears into something beautiful. Thank you.
Before I ask you for another round of applause for this amazing group of educators, okay, let's do it. Let's go. I want to share one final piece of advice I got from Margaret in '94 when I was in her class, her graduate class. We spent 6 weeks together talking about the triangle, which she called the teacher's role, the content of the curriculum, and the students, and that we have to pay attention to all three of those pieces of the triangle, that all of those need focus and development and thoughtful attention. And on the last day, she reminded us that in the center of that triangle is love. And I'm hoping you heard that love tonight in these stories. Thank you very much, and thank you.
just want to thank John and all of the educators for sharing your journey of teaching, reflection, and self-care. And may we all take care of ourselves this evening. We have cookies and fruit outside and water. Again, thank you all for joining us this evening for BEF's Margaret Metzger Fellowship. Have a good evening. Thank you, John. That was wonderful.